Let's now bring in a clinical psychologist, Professor Saths Cooper, to give us a sense of the impact of this tragedy, not only to the families, but to the community as well. We will also look at ways of responsible communities and its impact to nation building. A very good afternoon to you, Prof, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Well, this is really a tragedy, and to follow from a distance what has been unfurling is quite shocking. I think that the people who have commented thus far, including the president, have mistaken the immense tragedy and consequence of the loss of such young, these were 13-year-olds and upwards in our society, which should not have happened. I think we would do better if we stopped the talking heads, stopped not giving information that's appropriate, because we're adding to the trauma, the uncertainty of the families, the children who knew these children, and entire communities, because there's secondary traumatization that's happening. It's taken more than 10 days since the incident, and there's no definition on what is happening. That adds to a picture of a society that actually sacrifices its future, its children, at the altar of political incompetence, and uses these events for their own ends. We need to stop this. We need to actually show a humanity. And secondly, not to have arrested, not to have charged somebody who's blatantly responsible for allowing underage children into his tavern is a further indictment on those ministers, the president, for not doing what they are paid to do in this country. It is no coincidence that in June last year, statistics tell us that 74.7% of mid-teens to mid-20s are out of school, out of work. And here we are, mourning these children, needless losses, by the way, if simple regulations were followed. And can any of us imagine what it is to lose your child? It is an unnatural situation. Parents are not supposed to lose their children. So the trauma, Unati, is immense. And unfortunately, the kinds of statements and uncertainties and politicking that has been going on just simply is further trauma that the families and other children who knew these children are going to suffer. So I think it's about time that we manned up as adults and say that this has gone on for too long, and we need to step up and protect our children, which we're not doing.
And
the
Prof.
good
Cooper,
thing is that,
Prof. Cooper, I'd like us to talk about just that specific impact of that tragedy. You mentioned the parents, and we'll go back to just some of the people that have been impacted. You've rightfully said that today has been a very emotional day for the country, but most importantly for these families that have been affected. These are really not circumstances one would ever want to lose a loved one, and it becomes even more difficult if that death is of a young child. So just talking about from a parent's perspective, where does the healing process even begin? Especially as you mentioned, as it stands now, we still don't know exactly what caused the deaths.
Yes. And look, the loss of children for a parent is such an all-encompassing factor that parents are not going to get over it unless they get the right and in-depth psychosocial and emotional support that is going to be provided by people who are qualified, professionals out there who have the capacity and have the insight. I'm pretty certain that the Psychological Society of South Africa is the group to turn to. Their number is 011-486-3322 for help to ensure that the parents and the community at large do not deal with this tragedy and are able to cope. You're never going to get over the loss of a child, but at least there can be some ability to professionally deal with it rather than the kinds of opinions we've been getting, and politicians plainly taking advantage of a situation that is not one to be taken advantage of. The loss, the questions, the time taken, 10 days is too long for no answers. Then we get, well, it was not due to X. I mean, for crying out loud, where's the responsibility in leadership who should be showing a different way, a compassion, a consideration for our children and the other children who have been impacted that you see on the screen, and for those parents and immediate family that are tremendously hurting and will continue to hurt.
So, Prof, you spoke about just some of those devastating statistics in as far as young children are concerned in this country in terms of what the outlook is looking like for them. This tragedy, surely, there is a lesson that we can find from it. And the question then is, what role can the community play, in terms of raising children and starting then to build a nation, particularly if you look at how bleak it is if we are to wait for government intervention, as an example. What are some of the actions that communities can take to start to even feel whole and in control of some of the things that are happening around them, or the lack of leadership?
At least the faith-based organizations and leadership have stepped to the plate. That is the start. I will call upon teachers. I will call upon the helping professions, medical, psychology, social work, to also do their bit, because they have the skills to come together, engage with the community, not a top-down approach, to find out and inquire from the community, how is it that we can help you? Because we've got the skills not to just impose themselves on that situation. And I've already pointed out that the Psychological Society will, I'm pretty certain, be able to provide the right degree of professional expertise to help the community along. I think it's also time that our communities realize they need to mobilize themselves, as we did before in creating democracy, because nobody out there cares except when it's time to get our vote, which goes nowhere in this society where you're not electing your own representative. Somebody else, the party bosses, do so. So it's time that communities said, we're not going to tolerate illegal admission into places like taverns, allowing taverns that pop up when the regulations are clear. They shouldn't be in certain areas, in near schools, etc. We don't expect that children are not going to push the boundary. We need to understand that. But for adults to aid and abet is criminal. This is manslaughter and needs to be taken as such, and only through community mobilization, not relying on political and other groups who are going to exploit us at times of great human tragedy. The community, the parents, the elders in that area need to come together and say, let's do a different kind of analysis of what is happening, where our communities actually are deteriorating at a fast level, and our children see this. Our children are blotters. They take in all the information through all senses, and they reflect ourselves, and they should not reflect ourselves through going into taverns, to doing the kinds of things that adults behave badly on. So it's time that leadership from the community stepped up, student leadership in particular, as we showed in 1976. So it's about time that young people came to the fore.
Professor Saths Cooper, thank you so much for those soothing words. I particularly agree with you about leadership from a community level needing to step up. Thank you so much. That's all the time we have for this afternoon.
Thank you for having me.